Hi everyone, my name is Brianna and welcome back to Brianna's Bookshelf. Today I'm going to be doing the Travel the World book tag. This is a book tag that was created by Cliff from Cliff's Dark Gems. I was tagged in this by Angel from Angel Can't Read, and I'm very excited to get into these prompts and recommend some books to you all. So we've got 10 different prompts, and they are based on different countries or places in the world, and they each have like a different representation or connection point with books. Our first destination is the UK/Ireland. This location is known for history, culture, and literature. And the book prompt is to talk about an older book or a classic that I have loved. So I am going to be talking about Little Women for this destination. Little Women, I'm sure most people have heard of it, is by Louisa May Alcott. And I read this book a few years ago, so it's been a little while. It's not super fresh in my mind, but I remember just absolutely adoring this book. And part of that was that I feel like I really read it at the right time. I read this book actually while I was grieving, kind of a sad start to the video, but I honestly feel like that was a really good time to read this book. This book is following sisters, and I think this takes place in the US, actually, if I'm not mistaken, like early into US history. It's just very nostalgic for a time that obviously I have not lived in, but it's just like very much a simpler time. The experiences that the girls are having in this book are vastly different in some ways than the experiences that girls have growing up today, but there's still like this family and sisterly love, the support of one another, and the journey as each of them kind of comes into their own and reaches adulthood and has this coming of age story. And it is quite a long tale, but I found it extremely comforting and cozy when I read it. I would love to return to this at some point, probably during the winter months. But if you are in the mood for a classic and you want something that will be kind of comforting and inspiring to you, I would really recommend Little Women. Our next location is Australia, which is a beautiful location with wildlife that's found nowhere else on Earth. Our prompt here is to talk about a book with a original or unique premise. And for this prompt, I have chosen Chlorine by Jade Song. This is kind of a weird girl book. It is kind of horror adjacent, I would say. I don't know that it's specifically horror, but there are some horrifying and kind of body horror scenes in this. But once again, this is coming of age. We are following our main character, Ren, and Ren is in high school, I believe, and she is a swimmer. She's always been super obsessed with swimming. That's like her whole life's focus. And as she's kind of growing older and adjusting to the changes that she's going through, she begins to become extremely fascinated with mermaids and becomes convinced that she herself is actually going to turn into a mermaid. So, a very, very unique premise. I love a good mermaid book, but I don't think I've ever read one before where a human thinks that they're turning into a mermaid, and one that manages to blend like female coming of age with like body horror and just kind of odd descriptions of things so well. I would highly recommend this, and I find it to be extremely unique and original. Destination number 3 is New Zealand, a land of breathtaking beauty. And the prompt for this one is to talk about a book where the setting is so stunning that you would like to live there. And for this prompt, I have picked The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I feel like I honestly don't think about this book super often, but when I thought about this prompt and I was looking at my shelves, I thought, yeah, The Familiar actually had a really stunning setting, and that was of Spain. And I think this book is taking place around like the 1700s or something like that. I might be a little bit off, but it's set in historic Spain. But the descriptions of the surroundings were just so, so beautiful. I've never been to Spain, but I feel like I can imagine that kind of Mediterranean type of vibe and like the warmth, the sun on the streets. There was, I think, like pomegranates and oranges and things like that growing around the buildings in this book. And there is a castle introduced at some point. With this one, I feel like the setting is not really the focus of the story, but it is obviously a part of it, and it does connect with what happens and the characters. And I also think that I heard that Lee Bardugo like kind of loosely inspired this on some of her own family history. So clearly, Spain as a setting is connected and important there as well. And yeah, I just really liked the setting, and I feel like it was unique and reminded me of a European summer, but historic style. Our fourth destination is France, which obviously hosts Paris, the city of love. So, the prompt for this destination is to talk about a book where love is either a central part of the story or is just present in the story, and it does not have to be a romance. But for this prompt, I have chosen Divine Rivals, which I would consider to be fantasy romance. And this one is just very romantic, in my opinion. So in Divine Rivals, we're following Iris. Iris wants to be a writer, and she ends up going to work for a local newspaper. And there she meets Roman, who also works at this newspaper, and they become kind of office rivals. They are constantly pitted against one another, but this does, of course, blossom into a bit of an enemies to lovers romance. This is, like I said, fantasy, so there's also some other elements going on. There is a war being fought in this world that is actually very heavily influenced by the gods. The gods themselves are kind of raging this war and then recruiting humans to be a part of it. And honestly, just the descriptions of the romance and the banter in this book, I think, are so, so sweet and romantic. Unfortunately, I was not as big of a fan of the second book in this duology. I feel like the romance wasn't quite as heavily focused as it was in this first one. But in this first book, I found it to be highly romantic. I did annotate, and I feel like there was a lot of specific quotes that were just like so sweet and romantic and very wholesome. This is like a very wholesome, not spicy kind of romance. Our fifth destination here is Germany, and specifically Oktoberfest, the world's largest beer festival. So, this prompt is to talk about a book where wild parties or crazy celebrations are central to the storyline or are present in the story. And for this prompt, I have chosen House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in the Crescent City series. And the reason that I chose this book is because this is an urban fantasy. And in the beginning of the story, our main character, Bryce, is very into going out. And like I said, this is urban fantasy. So there are actually nightclubs and drinking and drugs and things in this city that this takes place in. And so in the beginning of this novel, Bryce is super into going out with her best friend, and they're always going to the club and taking drugs or drinking, staying out all night and partying. And obviously, that is not like what happens throughout the whole book. Things do start to change drastically from there. And eventually, Bryce's partying becomes slightly out of control due to other circumstances and things that she's dealing with emotionally. But this is one of the only books I could think of specifically that had a lot of partying in it. And it was actually something that I really did enjoy about this book. I love that element of the urban fantasy that this reminded me a lot, of real life and being more connected with some of my own experiences than say another like more traditional fantasy would. I think that's interesting to be able to see these characters go out dancing and things like that. It's just super fun. And overall, this is just probably one of, if not my favorite fantasy book of all time. I think the characters and the whole storyline is just expertly crafted and really, really makes you care about the story so much. So if you haven't checked this one out, I would highly recommend it. You can tell this is another one where I've annotated it quite a bit. Our sixth destination is Mexico for its tourism and beaches. And the prompt here is to talk about a book that's set on the coast or on an island. And for this prompt, I'm choosing Where I End by Sophie White. I just recently read this book a few months ago and I absolutely loved it. It is set on an island, it is set on a small island in Ireland. And this is horror, and it is, I would say, literary horror. It definitely has some body horror elements as well, and it's extremely dark and disturbing. It is following this young girl who lives on this island. She's grown up there and lived there her whole life. And she, along with her grandmother, take care of her mother, who is extremely disabled and pretty much in a like non-responsive state. And our main character is dealing with this and her emotions about basically her whole life and the way that she is having to take care of her mother. And then at the same time, there are these like rumors of the island being cursed. And another young woman moves onto the island and she's a foreigner. And our main character becomes increasingly obsessed with her. So it's definitely a tale of obsession, depravity. It's, as I said, extremely disturbing. But if you can stomach it, it is a fantastic read, fantastic writing, great characters. I think it really delves into topics that I've never read focused on before, and I thought it was fantastic. Our next destination is Italy for its cuisine, fine food, and wine. So, the prompt for this one is to talk about a book where food or drink are essential to the story. And for this prompt, I am going to choose What Hunger by Catherine Dang. This is another one that I've just read very recently, and I feel like this is a bit of an ironic one. I don't want to go into specifically why, even though I don't think it's really a spoiler, but just to keep this extremely vague in case you don't want to know too much about the book. But the reason that I chose it for this topic is that we are following this young Vietnamese American girl as she is coming of age and kind of finding out what ways she's different and similar to her family, and just, making her way in the world and having kind of an uncomfortable experience doing so. But like I said, her family is Vietnamese, and there is tons of descriptions of Vietnamese food in this book. They're constantly going out to pho and having all sorts of other Vietnamese foods, whether at home or out and about, and at their church that I hadn't even heard of, but that sound absolutely amazing. There's lots of descriptions of meat cooking, of the dishes being prepared, things being sliced up, and kind of the family aspect of different family recipes and cooking together. So I feel like that is a very strong role to this book and also really connects to other aspects of the book well. Our eighth destination is Austria for its alpine landscapes and skiing and snowboarding. So, the prompt here is to talk about a book where a sport or contest is central to the story. And I have chosen Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's been a little bit since I've read this book, but it's obviously still the first book that comes to mind when I think about a book about a sport. I can't think of too many examples of this, and this is my favorite example, I would say. In this book, we're following Carrie Soto, who is a tennis player, and she has been retired from the sport, but she was, uh, during her time, she was the female tennis player to hold the most Grand Slam titles. And in her retirement, she notices that another young up and coming tennis player is getting very close to breaking her record. And Carrie just cannot handle that. So she decides to make a comeback, to re enter the sport and attempt to fight back her title, even in her older age for the sport. And it's honestly just so well written. I never thought that a book about tennis could keep my attention so much, but I was absolutely sucked into the story as well as to the tennis as well. The way that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes the tennis matches themselves keeps you so gripped. It's honestly unbelievable. So if you haven't read that one yet, I would highly recommend it. Our ninth destination is South Africa, the Rainbow Nation. And the prompt here is to read a book by a diverse author, whether that be race, gender, sexual orientation, any of that. And I have chosen The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, another one that I just read recently and loved. N.K. Jemisin is a Black female author, and this is about a fantasy world in which there are people who can control like seismic parts of the earth, basically. So people have magic where they're able to control earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. And there's just a ton of that going on in this world to start with. It's like a very seismically active world. And I had just never read any magic that was quite similar to this. I've heard of other types of earth magic in fantasy, but nothing that so specifically had to do with like earthquakes and volcanoes. And I found it extremely fascinating. The setup of this story is also just incredible. It really keeps you hooked and interested. And the characters were phenomenal as well. And I just cannot wait to continue this series. I think it's going to be a really well loved fantasy series by me. So I would highly recommend checking it out. For our 10th destination, we have a bonus prompt, which is where do you live? And choose a book that represents that. And I am from Washington, so I have chosen Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This does take place in Washington, and I feel like it's very quintessentially Western Washington. This takes place on a coastal town, and we're following Tova, who is an older woman. She is retired and she volunteers at her local aquarium. And her favorite thing about the aquarium is this octopus. You could see her on the cover that she ends up kind of striking up this friendship with. Her octopi are extremely intelligent creatures, and she feels like this octopus can understand her when she speaks, or she feels like she's having some sort of connection with it. And we're just kind of following her as different things happen in her world. Her friends want her to stop volunteering at the aquarium. They think she's too old. Some of her friends are moving away, going into nursing homes, things like that. So it's really, really interesting that I feel like it's kind of following a different stage of life that we don't normally see. There's like tons and tons of books about coming of age, but this is kind of similar, but kind of like coming into being a senior and your life and personality in that time of your life, which I found extremely interesting. And I love all of the descriptions of the water and the aquarium and the octopus, as those are things that I love and am passionate about as well. So it was so fun to read about. All right, that is it for the Travel the World tag. Thank you so much again, Angel, for tagging me in this. And again, this was created by Cliff from Cliff's Dark Gems, so go ahead and check his channel out as well. I will have both of their channels linked down below, as well as all the prompts. So if you would like to join this tag as well, please do so, and I will also tag some friends below. All right, thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!